All right, greetings, winners. I believe we are officially live with our November Speaker Series, Day 2 on technical interviews. For anybody who may not know me, I'm Umeesha. I am the program manager for Wonsulting, and I'll be your moderator today, or actually for the whole week for our November Speaker Series. But before we actually get started with all things technical interview related, I do want to find out where you guys are coming from. So let me know in the chat below where you're tuning in from, whether in the United States or in all of the countries that our Wonsulting community definitely reaches. I'd love to know where you guys are all tuning in from. So definitely comment below and let us know where you're at right now. All right. And as we continue with that, I also want to go ahead and just dive right into Day 2 of our November Speaker Series and introduce a little bit of our speakers today. I'm really excited because we've had such incredible companies lately on our speaker series, and that is just continuing today. So the first person that I want to welcome on this speaker series is actually Avanti, who is a technical recruiter at Virgin Hyperloop. So Avanti, thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to have you and to learn a little bit more about technical recruitment and the interviews as well. And next up, we have Julee, who is a technical recruiter at Q. And again, Julee, thank you so much for taking time to be a part of our Wonsulting Speaker Series. And for everybody in the chats right now, let's go ahead and put hashtag Avanti and hashtag Julee in the comments section below to welcome them into this panel and to make them feel home with our Wonsulting community. And last but definitely not least, we also have Calvin, who is a technical recruiter at LinkedIn. So Calvin, again, thank you so much for taking the time to be on this panel today. And let's go ahead and put hashtag Calvin in the chat to really welcome all of our panelists and also Calvin to this session today. And oh my God, I can't believe where all of you guys are tuning in from, but we have people from Brazil, we have people from Ohio, Michigan, Bay Area, Chicago, Texas. So we're definitely international today for our speaker series. And I'm excited to go ahead and get into technical interviews and how all of us can prepare for them. So let's go ahead and start with our first question. And that's going to be a really basic question as to why do you think technical interviews are helpful, or what is the purpose behind them? And Calvin, I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, so again, thank you for having me. Nice to be here to share a little bit more about my insights. Well, why is technical interview helpful? Well, from a company's perspective, when we hire software engineers, there's going to be a lot of projects and tasks and things that you have to build. So by doing technical interviews, we want to make sure that you have the technical ability to be able to come in to actually do those projects. And it's one thing that, we want to make sure that you have the ability. Another thing is we want to make sure we're setting you up for success so that when you do join a company, you feel like you're not struggling. You're going to be challenged, but not struggling, right? You're going to be having the opportunity to grow and have opportunity to learn. So that's my take of like why taking an interview is helpful from a company's perspective. Also from a candidate's perspective, I think a lot of candidates actually learn from interviews by like speaking to the interviewers and by being able to actually learn some areas and topics they might not to do it day to day. I think it's a good learning opportunity as well from a candidate's perspective.
Right. And I think it's important for us to learn not just the perspective of the candidate, but this perspective of you guys, which is exactly why we have you on this panel today, to learn a little bit more about what the back end of recruitment is like, especially on a technical level. And Avanti, I'd love to learn a little bit more about why you think technical interviews are helpful for both the company and the candidate as well.
Yeah, sure. So thank you again for having me on the panel today. I think Calvin nailed it right on the head. I agree with a lot of the points that he made in terms of it is just a step in the interview process that lets the team know, will you be able to kind of hit the ground running, or at least have a lot of the boxes checked off in terms of what the job will entail. So I don't want to be too redundant, but I do think there's mutual benefit for the company, the hiring team, as well as the candidate knowing what's at stake, what the job will really entail. That way you're not signing up for something that you're not interested in or passionate about, or even maybe have the background suited for.
Right, exactly. And Julie, why do you think technical interviews are helpful or important, and what do you think is the purpose behind them as a recruiter yourself?
Of course, of course. I would love to share my insight as well. Obviously, we're aware a lot of companies do have a lot of different technical environments which they operate in. And I think technical interview is that one chance where you're able to, as a candidate interested in the company, demonstrate your platform and also language agnostic expertise. So it's not only intended to show not just your problem solving skills, but also critical thinking abilities as well. One of the other questions that we'll delve into a little later kind of asks, what questions should you ask when it comes to interviews? And kind of going off of that, I do want to mention that these companies are not only looking for yes men. So I think these technical interviews are your chance to really demonstrate how you personally, as an expert engineer developer, go about approaching a specific situation when it comes to technical challenges that a company or a team might face.
Right. And Julie, you put it perfectly as well. And a lot of these companies aren't looking for yes men. They want to know what distinguishes you. And that goes a little into my next question, because if there's anything about a technical interview, you said it yourself, Julie, they're looking for language diagnostics. And that brings me into a perfect segue into our next question, which is what coding languages are needed for technical interviews, or what coding languages are the ones that most recruiters will look for in terms of those diagnostics. And Julie, I'd love to start with you since you brought it up in your first question as well.
Of course. So in terms of coding languages, I think it definitely varies. Once again, so many companies are operating under such a diverse technical environment, which is exciting in itself. I do want to mention that a lot of the hands-on developing skills that most oftentimes come up is really that expertise in Java and also Python. And of course, in recent years, the more modern frameworks like React and Node for the backend as well. But first and foremost, because a lot of these coding challenges are testing your ability to work with a more scalable product, I think that hands-on coding expertise with Java and Python is something to definitely keep in mind, when you go about applying to these companies.
Right, exactly. And let us know in the chat below what programming languages you guys are learning right now. I know with everything going on in 2020, some of us have been trying to refine those skills. So let us know in the chat which ones you're trying to, again, refine your skills in. And Calvin, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what coding languages you think are needed for technical interviews, or ones that maybe candidates like us should really focus on over the next few weeks or months.
Yeah, so again, I agree with everyone has been saying. I can only speak for LinkedIn's perspective. So again, during the technical interview, we again do not require candidates to use a specific language, even though LinkedIn, we are a Java house. However, I guess based on the area that you're working in, for example, if you're working the system area, lower level, then you might use like C, C++. Or if you're working on, for example, data science area, they might be using Python, or even like scripting languages like R or SQL. So it really depends on the area that you're working in. But I think at the end of the day, you get to pick your language, I guess, for most of the companies. But for whatever language that you pick, we really expect you to be very comfortable in that language, right? So you get to, I guess, have your own choices, but at the same time, once you've made your choice, then that's our expectation comes in for that specific language of your choice.
Right. And so many of us, again, we have Wonsulting winners right now who are sharing a little bit about the languages that they're learning, which is languages that you guys just talked about: R, Java, C++, SQL, and of course, HTML, CSS. So definitely the Wonsulting community is learning a lot already. So let's go ahead and click that like button to just provide some support to our speakers. And Avanti, I do want to ask you our next question, and that is, what should a candidate bring to a technical interview? Is there something that they can bring that really wows you as a recruiter?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a couple of tips that I have. One thing that I'd start off with is, from the candidate perspective, you want to go in with the expectation that you as the candidate are likely probably more of an expert within the given field than maybe your recruiter might be. The recruiter might have a really good foundational understanding depending on how long that they've worked in the role. But if you can do as much homework you can beforehand and really come ready in that call that you have with a recruiter, going over your experience and why you think it's a good match with the role, that's kind of like the best case scenario. Those are some of the most memorable calls for me. So I think the best way, the best things you can come in with are really studying the job description and being ready to speak to each point that you can that has relevance to something that you've worked on before, something that you're currently working on, and where you think you can add value. And again, those are some of the most memorable calls that I've had, because it really feels like someone is really prepared in the right way. Another thing is to really bring, because a lot of these conversations are happening over the phone or over video, as much enthusiasm as you can convey, your energy, your passion for whatever the company's mission happens to be, tying that all in at the end will just kind of end the interview with a nice little bow tied on top. And I think that's a really great way to make a lasting impression, because the ultimate goal of the recruiter is to learn as much about you and convince a hiring team why they should move you forward in the interview process. So if you can be as prepared as possible and come in with clear communication, that is where your control lies. Whatever happens after that is kind of out of your hands at that point. So as long as you can leave that phone call knowing and having the confidence that you did everything that you could, you spoke to everything that you think is relevant to the needs of the role, I think you'll be in good shape.
Right. And Avanti, you said it best, focusing on what you can control and being prepared for what you can prepare for, and then the rest just leaving it up to the company or to the recruiter. And that's something that we talk about a lot at Wonsulting, is really focusing on the 40% or the 50% that you have control over. And Calvin, I do want to ask, because again, we talked a little bit about what candidates should bring to an interview, but my next question is, what types of technical projects have candidates brought to you in the past, or any examples that have really stood out to you as a technical recruiter?
Yeah, great question. So I think really depending on the level or how much experience you have had. For example, I have talked to entry-level candidates who primarily give me examples about for example, their internship projects or the research project they did on campus. Or if it's a PhD candidate, then they might have talked about, the research or the paper that they've been writing or they've written. And then later on, when it comes to more experienced candidates, then they might be able to talk about the current project they're working on or the most recent 1 or 2 projects. But my rule of thumb when it comes to project is, one thing is the project when you want to pick to talk about should always be something that you generally are excited about. I've had candidates talking about project that they're not really excited about themselves. They only say it because maybe it's big, it's impressive. But then when you actually ask, okay, what was your role in the project? What did you do? Why did you pick this project? They didn't have any strong reasoning. So that, to me, even to the hiring manager, is a red flag, because this is where we want to see where you're passionate about and what you have done in that project. Now, we're not really looking to hire people who work in that project. We're trying to hire you. So we want to learn about your specific contribution and why did you choose this project. So usually people coming with passions and excitement about the project they've done, that to me usually is always a good project.
Right, exactly. And again, Julie, I also want to ask you, what types of technical projects have candidates brought in the past? I know, like Calvin said, that it really differs on the position that they're applying for, but as a technical recruiter at Q, have you seen any that really stood out to you?
Of course. I want to give examples of 2. First, talking about the more senior experts, the engineers who have personally have already held leadership positions as well. A lot of them will, I've seen, especially experts in big data and data engineering, they have shown and demonstrated a lot of their actual publications. Because it's a technology that's high in demand and are still being studied as we speak, these publications are something that they take really pride in. And oftentimes they're also active teachers and also, the educators at different institutions as well. On the other hand, I personally find it more fun is working with a lot of candidates in the user interface. So UI, UX engineers who oftentimes have these just beautiful platforms and their personal websites that demonstrate not just the visual beauty of the product that they're working on, but they do have an option for users, since we are able to access these websites and platforms and have like a test trial where you can really engage with the product. And those have been by far the most fun ones for me.
Right, and I think you brought something that's very valuable to the Wonsulting community as well, because so many of our winners are focused in UX and UI, and we're interested in our personal websites and our portfolios as well, and that's a technical project that can be brought to a recruiter.
Right.
And my next question then is, what's a big mistake that candidates make while interviewing, especially when it comes in the technical level? And Calvin, I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Mistakes. I think one mistake that's not really about technical is that when I or one interviewers asked candidates, why are you interested in this company? Or why do you want to interview? Why do you want to, like, why are you here, right? And then the biggest mistake you can do is really to say, oh, because the recruiter reached out to me, or I don't know. Then that to us is immediately a red flag. That's beyond just your technical skills. So I think it's really just making sure that when you get asked those questions, or when you're interviewing or talking to a specific company, you want to know your reasoning. Why do you want to talk to the company? What about that company that make you excited, right? So I think that's a mistake that's more than just technical. But when it comes to technical aspect, again, the language that you choose, and if you're not really comfortable with the language that you choose, for us, it's another red flag. For example, the syntax of the language and how to use the language to solve a specific question. To us, since you pick that language, we expect you to be very comfortable. And then the third one will probably be communication in general. I always tell candidates that all of our interviewers are not mind readers, and their goal is to help you to do well, but they cannot help you if they don't know what you're doing. And they can only assume as much as they could. And usually what interviewers have to assume during the interview, 9 out of 10 do not assume something positive. They always assume something a little bit negative, or something just like, oh, maybe the candidate didn't know, or maybe the candidate is not familiar with this. Then that usually is never a good sign. So, but actually you might know and you're just thinking to yourself, but the interviewers might not be aware. So make sure you always communicate with your interviewers, and it's even better to over-communicate than not communicate enough, because if it's over-communication, the worst case scenario, the interviewer is like, oh, they can't talk too much, but it's not too bad. But if you don't talk enough, then the interviewers start questioning your fundamental skills, and that is a much bigger red flag compared to over-communication.
Right, and it's interesting that you brought up communication and how important that is in an interview as well, because when we think technical, we immediately think about, you know, the language diagnostics and all the hard skills that recruiters ask for, but sometimes we do have to focus on our soft skills as well. And Avanti, what's a big mistake that candidates have made or do tend to make while interviewing with you?
Yeah, I have a few. I definitely co-sign what Calvin said about not knowing how to answer, or really well thoughtfully answering the why do you want to work here question. That can kind of make or break the interview, actually. And also a few more things. I think a big mistake a lot of people make, probably unknowingly, is not knowing when or how to admit that they don't know an answer to a question. So a lot of times people will flub or kind of BS an answer. And it's actually a lot more impressive when you say, I actually don't know that. And if you can take it a step further and say, but if I were tasked with a question or a question or activity like that, this is what I would do to go find the answer. And I always get really positive feedback in our scorecards, which is kind of like the written feedback we get after interviews, from our technical team saying, hey, I'm really impressed by the fact that they said they didn't know it, and they weren't trying to fake it. And so that's actually really impressive. So just it shows honesty, and it shows that you're not over boastful about what you know or don't know. Another thing that's really important, I think, is to, someone mentioned it a little bit earlier, but to really highlight what your individual contribution was to a project. A lot of people like to use the terms, we and our team did this, which is really great. I don't want to, I think it's great when people have like kind of the team perspective and really want to give credit to others, which is awesome, but to also highlight what you individually did, because a lot of times we get feedback like that too. Like, I kind of left the call not knowing exactly what this person did, and the person that I talked to beforehand actually highlighted what they did, so we're going to move that person forward instead. So those can just be little stylistic things that can really make a huge difference. And then lastly, sort of what Calvin was saying too, I think it's really important to elaborate as much as possible without overdoing it, of course, but that's a lot of the common feedback I get as well from hiring managers being like, they answered it with a one-word answer and then they just waited for me to ask the next question. And it's nice when you can add some detail because, you know, like what was mentioned, you are the expert in your background. The person on the other end of the phone is likely a stranger that you've never talked to and they know nothing about you. So being detailed is important.
Right, exactly. And I love how, Calvin, you talked again about being detailed and the communication and the way that you really talk to the recruiter and how that's just as important as the technical skills as well. And again, comment inside #insightful if you've been finding these tips really helpful for your next technical interview. And again, Julie, I do want to ask you as well, what's a big mistake that candidates make while interviewing or have made when interviewing with you?
Of course, and before I begin, I want to mention that Avanti and Calvin both, I think, hit it nail on the head. I do want to delve a little more into that communication part. Over communication, definitely more preferred than under communication. I did mention that hiring managers are not looking for just a yes man. And I think the biggest mistake I do see candidates making is not asking enough questions, meaning I know that oftentimes, if you're excited about the opportunity, you will organically have questions about the company, even, questions about the project that they're working on as well. I do want to go a little deeper into, let's say you can't think of a question now, and you can't think of any perhaps technical or directly related question because you're nervous or, for a million different reasons during an interview. I am a firm believer in the fact that people love to talk about themselves. I think I love to talk about myself sometimes too and don't know when to stop. That means if you can think of any questions, one tip is to ask questions to the employer or the hiring manager that you're speaking with. What really got them into the field that they're in? How has their time been with the company? And oftentimes they're taken back like, wow, that's something that you're interested in about me. Now you kind of are humbling yourself to shift the focus into the other person. And that being said, also, if you are at the moment nervous to, once again, think of any questions, then simply mention, hey, I think you answered all the questions that I may have had, and I have a thorough understanding of the opportunity and the position, and just kind of close the loop and thank them for really answering any questions that you may have had.
Right, exactly. And go ahead and click that like button if you're agreeing to, the mistakes that sometimes candidates make. I know a lot of us have made our own mistakes in interviews, and that's why we're here today to talk a little bit more about how we can better prepare. And again, it goes a little bit into my next question, because how can candidates prepare for a technical interview? Or what have you done in the past if you've gone through the technical recruitment cycle and you've learned a lot more as recruiters as well? And Julie, I'd love to start off with you.
Of course. One thing I do want to say is please, 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 as often as it's mentioned, do extensive research on the company. Not just what the company is, what it does, and what their products are, but check out their LinkedIn profile. It's current employees, current team members, perhaps somebody senior on the team who is likely to have a similar title that you will have if you were to join the team. What are their backgrounds? How long has their retention been with the company? What is the hiring manager's background? And what do you perhaps have in common from your research? And lastly, I do want to mention that if the company has a consumer-facing and publicly accessible product that you can test out, please, please, please do. An example would be if a company has a main product that's an application or platform that's available on the Apple or Android store, please download it and test it out real time as a user.
Right, and that's actually an amazing tip about downloading the technical apps that they already have and to see how it works, if there's anything that you might be able to contribute to it. And Calvin, how can candidates prepare for a technical interview?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all Julie said. I think doing research for the company is extremely important, and that also goes back to the mistake that I mentioned about why you want to work here. But in terms of the tips that I usually give to my candidates, one is just, unfortunately, you just have to practice. It's something that nobody can avoid, because really, especially the more seasoned you are, the more far away that you might be from the things that we're going to be looking for. As hard as it is for like CS fundamentals and the things that you probably learned all the way back in college, those are things that we are looking to ask you. So you really have to practice, and obviously it's going to be pretty much just a final exam. You just have to really go through all the example questions and things that you learn in college to really be able to come in prepared. And then the second tip I always tell my candidates is like the golden 3-step rule that I tell my candidates to really do it during an interview. They're not going to give you the answers, but they're going to show that you have a really good logical thinking. So the first step is always asking clarifying questions. Really does not matter what interview you're doing. It can be technical, it can be behavioral. Especially in the technical aspect, if you practice enough, a lot of times we hear the question like, oh, I've done it before, or I think that I know the answer right away. But you know that the interviewers know that too. So what they do is they like to twist it, or kind of change a little bit about it that you might not be aware if you don't really ask good clarifying questions at the beginning. And then later on, when you realize that, it might be too late because you might have spent too much time on the question that you thought it was. So asking questions be very important. And the second step is always verbally propose a solution first. That's going to save you a lot of time down the road, because a lot of times if you propose a verbal solution, confirm with the interviewer prior to actually do it hands-on, the interviewer can give you real-time feedback right away. Like, oh, maybe not, or have you thought about this? That way, instead of spending 30 minutes doing an approach the interviewer is not really looking for, then you might be able to change your approach after 5 minutes and realizing that's something that's not working. And then the third step is, of course, when you actually do the hands-on implementation, again, communication. Keep talking what you're doing. Keep the interviewers in the loop so that they can give you real-time feedback and be able to give you hints as needed, as their goal is to help you do well. They're not there to trick you or fail you on purpose. So that's kind of the 3 steps I tell all of my candidates and can potentially show a good logical approach.
Right, and I think it's amazing how you talked about asking those clarifying questions as well. And I do want to bring up to all of our Wonsulting community members who are watching right now, we'll be going into a short Q&A session after as well. So feel free to put your questions down in the chat below with #questions so that we can ask these incredible technical recruiters a little bit more about technical recruitment and what it's like to prepare for a technical interview and, of course, master it as well. And that goes a little into, again, my next question, which is, what makes a technical recruiter reach out to a candidate? Calvin, you mentioned a little bit that, oh, they'll say, oh, recruiter reached out to me. That's why I'm at this interview right now. But Avanti, I'd love to hear what makes you reach out to a candidate, whether on LinkedIn or any other platform that says, oh, this might be a good fit.
Yeah, so this one's going to probably be a big no-brainer, but fielding through incoming applications, which we're lucky that we get a lot of them, really looking for those keywords. So I know there's advice out there to kind of tailor your resume for every single job application that you send. I think that is a great tip, but also unrealistic. It's incredibly time-consuming. So if you're able to, if there are a couple of jobs out there that you do feel like that you're excited enough about to make new versions of your resume to kind of match, definitely don't copy and paste. That's a dead giveaway that you kind of did that. But if you can use the jargon that that company happens to be using in their job description that you might have worded a little bit differently in yours, those things will pick up. Because again, you have to understand recruiters are probably not the experts. We're not engineers. Some people out there might be former engineers, but however you can speak the language of the person that's going to be fielding the resumes, which is normally the recruiter, is going to put you in a good spot. Another tip I would give, that I know that there's the easy option through LinkedIn these days to apply through LinkedIn, which we get a lot of those. Unfortunately, a lot of times people have a LinkedIn profile that isn't fully baked or kind of built out, and they only have their job titles without the bullet points of what they've done. And that is kind of, the recruiter is likely not going to reach out to everybody as like a second step to say, hey, can you actually send me your resume? So make sure if you are applying through LinkedIn to make sure that your profile is built out so that all of the information is there. I can't tell you how many times I've run into that, and it's such a bummer because it's such an easy thing. But the person on the other side probably isn't realizing that we're not getting all the information that we need. And then lastly, there are those roles where that are probably harder to fill, or we're not getting as many qualified applicants as we'd like. So we have to go out there and search for people. So like what you talked about, Umeesha, it's when a candidate will hear from a recruiter via LinkedIn or whatever other source. So most of the time in that case, recruiters are searching, again, a lot of those keywords. So it is really important, if you are in the market, to have your LinkedIn profile built out with as much verbiage as possible, because you'd be surprised how many times recruiters are going on various sites like this, but LinkedIn is used a lot for those kind of sourcing searches. And you'd be surprised how much you might be getting reached out to once you build your profile out a little bit more than just your job titles.
Right, and I think so many of us have seen other people being reached out to by recruiters, and so many of us are working on our own LinkedIn profiles right now, and that's interesting that you shared a little bit about applying via LinkedIn and how that might not bring enough information. And Julie, I'd love to hear a little bit more. What makes you reach out to a candidate, especially as a technical recruiter at Q?
Of course. As Avanti mentioned, there's a lot of platforms in which we can have access to different interested candidates in the market nowadays. Every job description that I personally get from any hiring manager that needs help with the hiring need on a position, I like to narrow it down to top 3 skills, and from that, top 3 keywords. And in terms of technical capability, I think that's how I narrow down which candidates that I essentially want to reach out to. To add, topping on top of that, to make it a little more flavorful, I am one of those people that do read your intro summary at the top of your LinkedIn page. And when it tends to be colorful and flavorful, and I can really see your personality shine through it, I am more likely to reach out to you, because I feel that if you're the person that took the time to kind of briefly share how your professional journey has been, but what type of person you are and what you're interested in your next position, that tells me that you're more likely to advocate yourselves during an interview process and when you're pursuing an opportunity, and you're a well-rounded expert. I think there's like this joke and a myth in the IT world where they say a lot of engineers are not social people. They like to just sit at their desk, code all day, but they're not going to really socially interact with you, which I think is truly false. And I think really having a great intro and a background on your LinkedIn really helps you, kind of break that, I guess, myth that's come about for a long time. Last thing that I do pay attention to is specifically going back to LinkedIn again, recommendations from coworkers and previous supervisors, which are usually towards the bottom of the page. Those matter to me personally a lot as a recruiter, because I think if someone is willing to spend a few minutes to go out of their ways and mention how good you have been, or how pleasant it was to work with you, personally, and also in the job scope responsibilities as well, then it just shows that you have a lot of people that are rooting for you throughout every step of your professional journey.
Right, and that's really important too, to showcase to the recruiters what your past employers and of course your past coworkers say about you too. So I'm glad that you brought that up and you brought that specific tip. So go ahead and click that like button if you've been enjoying and loving the tips that Julie, Avanti, and Calvin have been sharing with us. And Calvin, I do want to move on to my next question, and I want to start with you for this one. Is what virtual interview tips should a candidate prepare for, especially with 2020? Most of us are over the phone, over the laptop. Even if it's not on a technical level, what can we do, or what tips should we have to really communicate well virtually as well?
Yeah, so that's actually one thing that we've been also working with our candidates, because at the end of the day, when it comes to recruiting, our first goal is not to hire people, is to make sure that you have good experience. Doesn't matter if you get hired or not. So I think from a candidate perspective, make sure that you're familiar with the tools. I think from LinkedIn's perspective, we use Zoom, right, as a virtual interview platform. And on top of it, when it comes to coding, we use CoderPad, or if CoderPad doesn't work, sometimes even Google Docs. And then when it comes to system design, that's when it gets creative with a lot of candidates. People get to use Zoom whiteboard, pen and paper, or physical whiteboard. So I would say for whichever way that you choose, make sure that you start practicing your interview with that approach, or with that whatever method you're trying to look at, right? For example, if you want to do pen and paper, then start preparing your interview with pen and paper. That way, when you actually do the interview, it's not going to be a big difference where you have to adjust to it. So make sure that you start practicing with that approach, and make sure you have a really strong internet connection, as basic as it is. I have so many candidates kind of drop off the call where the connection's kind of like shaky, and then they don't really, the communication part again becomes lacking because of the internet connection. So really the basic thing is you want to have a really strong internet connection, and always have your phone with you just in case. That way at least the interviewer can reach you at a different way. But another thing is you want to be aware that we all understand the situation of virtual and the pandemic, everything. So the interviewers are also very accommodating. So make sure that if you have any concerns or if you're not sure about something, just ask the interviewer. They're humans and they spend all their time trying to meet you virtually and to get you through the process. So they want you to, again, going back to my point, they want you to do well. They want you to pass. So if they can help you in whichever way possible, they would. So if you're not sure, if you have your own way of doing, like let's say a iPad doing whiteboard, you're not sure if it's okay with the interviewer, just ask them. And most of the time people would just say yes, right? And I think from all the interviews I've talked to, they're all very accommodating and they are all trying their best to accommodate candidates. So just simply ask and know that we're all dealing with this at the same time, and we'll understand as much as possible to know that the impact it might have on your interview.
Right, and that's an excellent tip, especially since we're all still, well, I'd say we've mastered the virtual world now, but at the beginning it was definitely a lot harder. And Avanti, I want to ask you again, when it comes to virtual interviews, does a virtual interview impact a candidate's chances of getting the job? Can it ever harm them? Can it help them? Or what are your thoughts about the virtuality of an interview now?
Yeah, I think there are actually a lot of pros and cons. I think some of the pros are that we've found at Virgin Hyperloop that interview processes are being expedited and are happening a lot faster because we don't have to coordinate travel, or people no longer have to take a full day off or two of work to be able to go to and from the site. And so there is that sense of urgency there that makes it really convenient. I think where both sides kind of lose out is there is so much value being able to, for a candidate to be able to see a site in person. I know there are some companies around the country that are still doing in-person interviews, but we've gone completely virtual for everything. And so that's kind of like the bummer for the candidate experience. And another thing that gets missed with the virtual world is kind of that human connection and meeting someone for the first time. There's just so much more when you can feel someone's energy being in the same room. And so that is something to keep in mind for candidates when you're on another side of the screen like this. However, you can show your personality, and especially if you're in later stages of the interview, of course, technical skills are likely they're probably the bread and butter of the role, but however you can stand out in other ways, showing your personality, letting the interview team know a little bit about you as a person so that you have like a long lasting effect, likely could be, the reason that the team chooses you over somebody else if all other things are equal. So just thinking about those things are really important. Smiling, I know interviewing can be really nerve-wracking, but if you can smile whenever you can remember, or have just that kind of upbeat energy and just show the excitement, I think really goes a long way since you're not in a room with someone.
And I think that goes along perfectly with what Calvin just said about hiring managers are human and they want to help you and they want to give you a good experience. And so many of us don't know that, but when they walk away from your company, whether or not they were hired, they should have a good experience. And that's something that a lot of us don't know. So I love that you guys brought that up. And Julie, I do want to ask the question that you talked about a little bit earlier as well. And that is, what's the best question to ask at the end of an interview, in your personal opinion?
I personally believe it is best to ask the hiring manager, what do you want this new team member in the position to bring to the table? I think a lot of the interview processes, and majority of it is about them letting you know what the opportunity entails, how your job responsibilities are going to look like, and really asking you how your professional journey has been. So definitely straight facts. But I think you asking the hiring manager realistically what they expect out of this person that's about to join their team, it's going to open up a lot of great conversations. You know, they might have something that's not really particularly listed on the job description. They might be looking for, you know, somebody with a completely different skill set, whether that's soft skills or more technical skills that they didn't think about before, but realized after speaking with you, who is the candidate, that they would like to see more of in this position. So I definitely, you know, recommend all candidates to ask the hiring manager, what do you want this new team member to bring to the table?
Right, and that's also such an important question as well that so many of us may be scared to ask. But like you said, Calvin, being able to communicate and asking questions and also to the recruiter and having that conversation is really important. So Calvin, I'd love to hear, in your personal opinion, what's the best question that can be asked at the end of an interview?
Yeah, I mean, Julie kind of brought up a lot of good points of the questions that a candidate could ask. I think another thing I would say, always tell candidates to ask questions about specific team or the team that they're going to be joining. In terms of, you know, maybe ask about the project they're working on, or even you can even think about ways to already improve what the team is working on. That would be even better, right? But at least bringing the idea of like you are already trying to place yourself in that team perspective is very, very important for the manager, because then they can immediately start thinking about what values that you could bring to the team, and then potentially looking at you as a team member. So that's one thing. Another thing is, again, like Julie said, people love talking about themselves. So if you want to kind of ask about the manager, you know, what their experience has been, for example, LinkedIn or at XYZ company, and why they even chose to join this company, right? And especially for people maybe who just joined a company as their interviewer, you know, this is a good opportunity to really understand, excuse me, their motivation of joining the company and what made them decide this is the company for them, right? Those are all the questions. And again, going back to, I think, the point I brought up earlier, it's that you really want to ask questions that you truly care about. If you just ask questions, again, by just faking it or just making it sound impressive, it's going to very easily show to the interviewers. So you can ask random questions as easy as, you know, what breakfast do you guys offer? Or, you know, I'm a vegetarian. Is there like a vegetarian option at the cafeteria, right? Those things that you care about to us, again, show your personality and show us that, you know, you're not trying to pretend to be someone. And that is also very, very important.
Right, and that goes along with what Julie said about not just being a yes man, but to really distinguish yourself from other candidates as well on a recruiter's perspective. And Avanti, I'd love to hear more. What's the best question or questions to ask at the end of an interview to really find out more about the position and the culture as a whole?
Yeah, so on top of what Julie and Kelvin already mentioned, one thing that came to mind is I think it's really great when candidates can ask how the role will evolve over time, what growth opportunities look like. I'm a huge advocate for letting candidates know that interviewing is a two-way street, and it can be really easy, especially when you're earlier in your career, of feeling like you're in the submissive position and you have to just say whatever you can to impress the person on the other side of the phone. But it is a really, really important decision that you're making in terms of what company you join and what role you're joining into. And so I think it's important that every candidate knows what the trajectory of that position could turn into down the line. And it also lets the hiring manager, whichever team member on the other side of the phone, it lets them know that you're seeing yourself there long term. So I think it's mutually beneficial, but I think that's a really good one that comes up a lot.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And go ahead and click that like button if you're really glad that they're talking about these tips and the questions to be asked at the end of an interview, because most of us tend to not know what exactly to ask. And like Julie said, people love talking about themselves. So to really create a two-way conversation with that interview as well. And I actually want to transition into a Q&A session for the last 15 minutes because you guys have been killing it and we've had question after question come in from the chat. And the first that I want to start off with is actually winner Rebecca, who had a question about what are credible ways to increase our technical skills if our educational background is not in tech? And Julie, I want to start off with you because you're a recruiter at Q right now, which is an IT and digital firm, but you also worked in the legal field for a little bit and you came in from that non-technical background. So how were you able to increase your technical skills in that way? And what are some things that our candidates can do?
Of course. So we live in a very digitally abundant world where knowledge is definitely endless. And I am blessed to be able to mention that, especially with COVID, more free knowledge and classes have become more available than ever. I actually did some Java development long time ago, working more so for my dad, trying to work on a website. And this is ages ago. Not that I'm trying to put an age to myself, but I remember just going through personally online classes, making sure that, you know, if you do have the financial means to invest in a more formal class, that's great. A lot of them are going to continue to be held virtually, but really putting in that investment of your time to take those classes, hold yourself accountable, and following along with it as if you are pursuing a formal education, as if you are really going for a final degree in that specific area of expertise. So I would definitely like to say that more candidates and talent clients that I have actually come from a non-traditional technical background, and which is beautiful because I have a close candidate of mine that I keep very close contact with, who comes from an English and literature background, who you can pick their brain about literature all day, but they have at one point decided that engineering and software development is a new expertise that they want to hone in. And they were able to purely do that by self-teaching themselves, whether that's Udemy, and there's, these platforms are endless. Finishing certifications, finishing courses as well, but the self-teaching is going to really prove that that's how you invested in yourself, because you decided to really overcome your different background and master a specific craft. And I do want to also mention that, especially coming from a non-traditional background, just know that you have a lot to contribute even outside of that technical skill. So as we mentioned for the last, about almost an hour, it's really about during the interview, not only able to demonstrate your technical skills, but coming from the non-traditional background, all the other skills that you have to bring to the table as well.
Right, and that's so important for us to hear too, that we are able to contribute not just technically, but in other ways when we work for the company. And Avanti, I'd love to hear, what are some credible ways that our Wonsulting community members can do to increase their technical skills? I know with COVID-19 and the pandemic, a lot of us have been taking online courses, but what else can we do to continue to increase those technical skills as well?
Yeah, well, I have a really similar kind of answer as what Julie had mentioned, but I think these days, especially in this pandemic, there are so many free resources out there. And so I know it can be really overwhelming to know what's available. And I know a lot of resources are becoming more easily available to people, especially on the financial side. So one example is, I live in Los Angeles, and here if you go to your local library and sign up, you can get a free pass to LinkedIn Learning, for example, which a lot of people don't know is out there. You don't have to pay for the premium always. And so I would highly recommend, seeing what resources are available in your area, whether it's calling your librarian and seeing if that's a service that they or resource that they offer. But, there are plenty of platforms out there that, you can list these things on your resume in kind of a thoughtful way. It doesn't have to be front and center, but just showing that you're making those leaps towards increasing your skill sets is really impressive, no matter who's hearing about it, even just for your personal development.
Right, and click that like button if you've been using this time to refine those skills like Julie and Avanti shared. And that is true. A lot of us don't know about all the resources available to us, but not only your library, but your schools, universities, they sometimes also have partnerships with LinkedIn Learning that you might be able to access some of the courses. But Calvin, I do want to move on to the next question in our Q&A session, and that is from Winner. What specific area are you looking for when you check the resume and the LinkedIn of a candidate?
Well, it's a great question. I think going back to what I think Avanti was mentioning earlier, is actually to be able to have a complete LinkedIn profile is very important. Again, when you look at candidates' profile, to me, I need to know what you've done. Right, you can say you are a principal staff software engineer at Google, which is amazing, great, all wonderful. But if I don't really know what you're doing, what you have done, I don't really have the confidence to reach out to you, right? So at the end of the day, your resume, your LinkedIn profile should give us recruiters the confidence that you will potentially do well in this role that we're trying to look for, and the confidence come from your experience and what you're currently working on and your skills, right? So make sure you have a complete profile. And again, when I also look at skills, right? So especially skills that are must work. If you look at the job description, there's usually two sections. One is required or basic qualification. One is preferred qualifications. So at least from LinkedIn's perspective, we really want you to have at least basic qualifications. If you do not have basic qualifications, that to us is you probably will not get the opportunity to move forward. And the preferred qualification, of course, are those ones nice to have. So you want to make sure when you apply for a job or a role that you want to have at least those basic qualifications on your LinkedIn profile and your resume to reflect that you, again, give us the confidence that you can potentially do well in this role. And of course, adding preferred qualifications will be very, very nice as well.
Right. And I think it's really helpful to hear about basic qualifications and those preferred qualifications and how we can show that, whether on a resume and a LinkedIn. So thank you, Calvin. And let's go ahead and put hashtag Calvin in the chat to thank him for all of the tips that he's provided us as a technical recruiter at LinkedIn. And Avanti, are there any specific areas that you look for when you're checking the resume or the LinkedIn of a specific candidate?
Yeah, so it's really going to depend on the role. I think a one-size-fits-all approach towards this question is the more organized your resume and LinkedIn profile is, the better. I think I want to start off with the caveat that for all candidates out there, no matter if you're happily at your job or will be in the market or are in the market now, there's a lot of conflicting kind of best practices coming from recruiters about what's good, what's bad. And I think we all have to remember, like, to keep the stress down, and that all recruiters are people at the end of the day. We all have very different perspectives on the subject. So it sounds like Julie, Kelvin, and I have seen eye to eye on a lot of things, but there are probably a ton of things that each of us that are really important to each of us in our recruiter kind of day to day that might not matter to the other person, and vice versa. And so I think there are a lot of parallels to recruiting and like dating, for example. So what might be a really standout thing to you about one person, and the next, your friend might be like, I don't care about that. So I do always really want to, like, it can be very stressful to be in the market and like try to look for all of this advice. And I think whatever you can take in that resonates with you, I think is kind of the best approach. And all of these pieces of advice are kind of like one big Venn diagram. And I think if you can find the neutral approach to a lot of these things, that's the best way to go. So with that being said, I tend to like, I've seen a lot of profiles out there that just have a really long paragraph about what someone's done at their job. And that can be really difficult for me personally to kind of read through. Bullet points are really awesome if you can kind of keep things big picture, especially if you can label things in kind of your top responsibilities. And as you go down, it goes down to like what you spend the least amount of time doing, but it's still a significant part of your role. So there are different organizational tips that I think are really great so that the recruiter doesn't have to go around searching and trying to find kind of the needle in the haystack. So I realize that's a very vague answer, but I think that's kind of a good high level approach.
Right. And like keeping things big picture and realizing that a one size fits all solution may not really work, because again, recruiters are human and every single recruiter is different. And my next question then, Julie, I do want to start with you, is if you have an idea which could add value, like a new approach to manufacturing or to solve a problem, is it okay to talk about it during an interview? And if so, what stage of the interview should you talk about it?
Absolutely. I would say absolutely at any stage. Obviously, you might be talking about one thing, or the hiring manager may be talking, and you don't want to just blur it in the middle of all that. But I'm so happy that Pratish asked that question, because, and I wish my excitement is like, just zooming through the camera, but absolutely. Because as a hiring manager, which I have been a hiring manager before in different positions outside of IT, when somebody gives me an impression that they are thinking outside the box, that they or, well, of course, something that's relevant to the work that's given, but thinking outside the box and have a new approach to things or a suggestion. There's nothing that excites me more than to hear about all of them. So I definitely encourage them to ask at the right time, but as often as you can.
And I think that answer is the perfect ending to our talk today about technical interviews and really sharing with the recruiter what you can bring to the company and how you can add value as a candidate. So Avanti, Julie, and Calvin, I do want to thank you from behalf of the Wonsulting community and also myself for taking an hour of your time to share a little bit more about technical interviews and for answering so many questions today about how we can prepare and how we can master the next one that we're at. So I do want to thank the three of you, and I also want to thank every single person who is watching this Wonsulting live and day 2 of our November speaker series on technical interviews. Don't forget to subscribe to our Wonsulting YouTube channel and hit that notification bell so you can get again, notifications every time we go live and share a little bit more about the job search and strategies that can help you. So don't forget to post about our November speaker series on LinkedIn or any other platform. And let's go ahead and thank our speakers on the comments below for taking the time to join us on our YouTube live today as well. So thank you guys so much and stay safe, and we'll see you back tomorrow for day 3.
Thanks, everyone.